Welcome to Placards and Psyches, where we unpack the psychology and realities of student activism in the Philippines beyond the rallies, placards, and hashtags.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Placards and Psyches. So for our last episode, very important yung pag-uusapan natin. How do we sustain change in UP student activism? Kasi honestly, activism in UP has always been part of the university's identity. But the hard part is sustaining the movements and maintaining their momentum.
Exactly. Ang daling mag-ingay for 1 week kapag may issue, diba? Pero paano mo siya gagawin long term? Paano siya magiging structural? And as students, paano natin siya mapapanatili even after graduation? So today, we'll be discussing 4 things: policy advocacy, coalition building, habit formation for civic engagement, and impact measurement.
Okay, so let's start with policy advocacy. Kasi activism isn't just a protest for protest's sake. Ang goal talaga nito is structural change. And one major issue right now is the protection of academic freedom. Kasi for decades, meron tayong tinatawag na UP-DND Accord of 1989. Basically, this agreement required state forces like the military or police to notify university officials before entering UP campuses.
And symbolic din siya. It reinforced the idea that universities should be spaces for critical thinking and dissent, and not spaces ruled by intimidation. But when the accord was unilaterally terminated, many students felt vulnerable. Kasi if protections can simply be removed by one administration, then gaano ba talaga katatag ang academic freedom?
Yes, which is why advocacy now goes beyond just bringing back the accord. The bigger goal is to institutionalize these protections through legislation, meaning gawing statutory right ang academic freedom. Dapat nakasulat mismo sa batas ng bansa so it becomes harder for future administrations to dismantle.
That's right. And connected rito yung issue ng red tagging. Red tagging is when activists, students, professors, or organizations are labeled as terrorists or enemies of the state without evidence or due process. Diba, dun pa lang, sobrang delikado na nung idea because it creates fear. Hindi lang siya simpleng accusation. It can threaten livelihoods, safety, and even lives.
To combat this, one proposal is for UP to actively lobby for a national anti-red tagging law. Importante rito yung legal definition. Kasi if walang clear definition, madaling i-deny o kaya i-justify.
Exactly. The proposed framework defines red tagging as government officials labeling individuals or groups as terrorists without court conviction, which reframes it as abuse of power, not free speech.
And another strong proposal is the duty to defend mandate. So kapag may student na na-red tag, the university should officially defend them publicly. Parang the logic is, an attack on one student is an attack on the institution itself. So this is important because silence from institutions can also become complicity.
Now let's talk about coalition building because no movement survives alone. And honestly, this is where many movements struggle. Kasi minsan sobrang focused on ideological purity. Yung parang, if hindi tayo 100% pareho ng politics, hindi tayo pwede magtulungan.
But effective movements usually operate through what scholars call radical inclusivity, meaning the basis of unity is not complete ideological agreement, but a shared, non-negotiable goal. For example, protecting academic freedom. Hindi kailangan identical lahat ng beliefs ng coalition members as long as united sila on the core issue.
And one historical example nito is the Congress for a People's Agrarian Reform or CIPAR formed in 1987. What made CIPAR powerful was that it united 13 peasant federations across different ideological positions. So instead of obsessing over differences, they amplified common demands.
Honestly, ang relevant nito sa UP activism today. Kasi if student groups collaborate with labor unions, urban poor communities, environmental groups, mas lumalakas yung pressure for change. So, from isolated campus issues, nagiging national concerns. And this is why collective volume matters. Kasi mas mahirap i-ignore ng state ang broad-based coalitions.
Okay, so this next part is really interesting and personally a bit exciting because it connects activism with behavioral science. And the big question here is, paano nagiging long-term habit ang civic engagement? So one study by Ang and colleagues in 2012 found that Filipino college students who believed they could influence outcomes or had an internal locus of control were more civically engaged. So, malaking factor yung belief na may kaya kong baguhin. Kasi if students feel powerless, bakit nga naman sila kikilos, diba?
Exactly. Agency becomes the psychological trigger for participation. And interestingly, civic engagement can also become emotionally sustaining. During the pandemic, a study by Wu and colleagues interviewed Filipino youth volunteers and found that civic work helped them cope with isolation and loneliness.
Yes, which says a lot kasi activism is often framed as sacrifice only. But for many people, it actually creates meaning, belonging, and purpose. And social media became important not just for awareness but for building social capital. Parang communities survived digitally.
Yes, and another important point is that civic engagement improves emotional regulation and empowerment among youth. So, activism isn't just beneficial politically, may personal developmental effects din ito.
Right, and this connects to habit formation theory, a behavioral science review by Akash and Chowdhury in 2025 described habits as a loop. Cue, routine, reward. So, halimbawa, may nakita kang community pantry call online. Yun yung cue. You volunteer, so that's the routine. Then, you feel fulfillment or social connection. Then, that's the reward. And the more that this loop repeats, the more automatic the behavior becomes. Which is why small, consistent actions matter more than one-time grand gestures. Kaya sustained civic engagement is also built through repetition.
And according to UNICEF, developing these habits during adolescence increases the likelihood that civic participation continues into adulthood. So, involving youth isn't just symbolic, but is also foundational for democracy itself.
And lastly, let's discuss what movements often forget, measuring impact. Kasi minsan, activism becomes an endless activity without reflection. A Philippine Institute for Development Studies report emphasized that impact evaluation helps leaders determine what actually works.
And honestly, ang powerful ng idea na if you can't measure success, your campaign risks becoming just another activity. Pero this doesn't mean na we reduce activism to just numbers and statistics.
Right, that's very important to note kasi impact can be external, organizational, or personal. External impact could be policy wins, media coverage, or more public awareness. Organizational impact could be volunteer retention, coalition growth, or petition signers. And personal impact matters too, like changes in political awareness, confidence, and emotional resilience.
Yes, and even social media metrics can matter because they show visibility. And so the key here is intentionality. We have to ask, what change are we actually trying to create? Because sustainable activism isn't just loud, it should also be strategic, measurable, and adaptive.
Ayan, so sadly that is it for our last episode. At the end of the day, sustaining change means treating activism not as a temporary emotional reaction, but as a long-term civic practice.
It's policy advocacy that protects people structurally, coalition building that prioritizes solidarity over perfection, habit formation that turns participation into part of everyday life, and impact measurement that helps movements grow instead of stagnating.
Because real change doesn't happen in one rally, one hashtag, or one semester. It survives through systems, relationships, and repetition.
So that's it. Thank you for listening to Placards and Psyches.
Where sustaining change starts with sustaining participation. See you next time.
From your Iskos and Iskas, whether you choose to organize, volunteer, educate, advocate, or simply stay informed, we'll see you in the next episode.